Okay, hello and welcome everybody back to Social Studies. It's me again. Um, Before we get started on this lesson, I kind of want to talk about the last lesson and the way it went. It seems like a lot of people didn't really get it done. Not too many people did the exit ticket. I really need you to do that. So I'm going to give you time at the end of this lesson to finish up what didn't get done last time. So make sure you did the Manifest Destiny assignment. Make sure you did the exit ticket. Okay. But the lesson for today is that we want to be able to identify the events and issues of the presidencies of Houston, Lamar, and Jones. We talked about Houston's first time in office last time. Today we're going to talk through Lamar. We're going to talk through Houston becoming president again, and then finally Anson Jones becoming president. So the do now for today is to study vocab, same as last time. Give me 10 minutes of good studying. That test is coming up next week on either the 18th or 19th if you're odd or even. So keep that in mind. 2 pages of notes again today. We're going to start with the ones Republic of Texas Part 2, and then we'll go to the second page, Houston Returns, and then after that will be that time to work on things that you're missing. Okay? So make sure you get those done. I'm going to be grading all of that this weekend. The video questions for the Alamo movie and the Manifest Destiny assignment. So let's get started. If you haven't done the do now, go ahead and stop now and do the do now. But today we're going to be talking about a different vision for Texas. Lamar was a very different person than Houston was. So Lamar is going to get elected in 1838. Um, he was the vice president, but Texas at the time had a rule that a president could not be president twice in a row. So even though people liked Houston, he couldn't be president again legally. So Lamar got the popular vote. Here's just some bullet points. These will be the boxes at the top of your notes, 3 bullets for each one that just kind of sums up who these people were as president. Houston, we know, worked on keeping the peace with Mexico and the natives. He spent as little money as possible, and he really thought that Texas should be annexed by the United States. Lamar was very different. He was not peaceful. He wanted to remove all of the native Texans. So that means all of the different native tribes that we've talked about: Kiowa, Apache, Comanche, and a new one we're going to talk about today, the Cherokee. He spent a lot of money on military expeditions and other things. And he really wanted Texas to remain its own independent country and even expand its borders. He wanted Texas to get bigger. So, President Lamar, he was an aggressive politician. This quote is from his inaugural address, the speech he gave when he became president of Texas. If peace can be obtained only by the sword, then let the sword do its work. So he's going to have some clashes with the native Texans. There's really only one thing you need off of this slide, and it's the things about the Cherokee. So, unlike Houston, Lamar wanted to kill or force all of the natives out of Texas. Lamar would use the Texas military and his generals to force the Cherokee out of Texas. The Cherokee were the Cherokee were a tribe of natives that had been moved from the US against their will out of the United States. And they had settled in East Texas, kind of that same part of East Texas where the Caddo were. And Lamar is going to use his military to force them out. So in your notes, I left this just as a blank you could fill in of just write the word Cherokee in that blank, and that's all you need from this slide. So you should right now in your notes have those 6 bullets at the top, 3 for Houston, 3 for Lamar, and then that blank filled in, and we're ready to keep going. So the first thing we need to talk about with Lamar is the Council House fight. Lamar wanted the Comanches out of southwest Texas. The Comanches were incredibly deadly at the time. They were some of the best horsemen and some of the best archers the world had ever seen, and they were incredibly violent. There were a lot of different fights between the Texas Rangers and Comanches all across the border of the Comanche territory and the Anglo-American territory. Finally, the Comanches would agree to meet with Texas in San Antonio to discuss peace in March of 1840. The Comanches promised when they came to San Antonio to bring all of the captive Anglo-Americans that they had and bring them to San Antonio to be released. But when the Comanches showed up, they only brought one prisoner, an Anglo-American girl who looked to be tortured. She had a lot of scars and burns and wounds, and this really outraged the Texans because not only were they promised way more than one prisoner, the one they got was pretty beaten and roughed up and bruised. Go ahead and pause if you need more time to write. I'm going to take these big long pauses, so any time that you need more time, just feel free to pause. So, this is continuing the Council House fight. The Texans refuse to let the Comanche leaders leave without having all the Texas captives released from all Comanche bands in all of Texas. The Comanche obviously can't do this while all of the leaders are in San Antonio, so they try to leave the city. When they leave the city, the Texas Rangers attack them. This fight is known as the Council House fight. 7 Texans were killed, and about 35 to 40 Comanche leaders were killed. This would include all of the Comanche that went with them, so there were some women and some children. These Comanche were outnumbered and unarmed. And of course, when the news gets back to the rest of the Comanche nations, they're furious. All of their leaders had attended a peaceful talk and were killed. So to them, it almost seems sort of like a trap. So the Comanches would continue fighting. They actually killed the rest of the Anglo-American prisoners that they had, and they started raiding a bunch of towns, particularly Linville and Victoria down in South Texas. The Texans fought back and killed more than 100 Comanches in a battle that was called Plum Creek. The name of this battle doesn't need to be in your notes, but understand that the fighting went back and forth between the Comanches and the Texans and resulted in hundreds of deaths over the next few years. Even today, the Comanche Nation that is in Oklahoma still does not forgive Texas for this. Moving on to the next section of our notes, we're going to talk about the relations with Mexico and the Santa Fe expedition. So, Lamar wanted to claim more land. Remember, we talked about him wanting to remain independent and expand the borders of Texas. Lamar is going to start sending rebels through to revolt in Mexico, thinking that that would help flip more Mexican territory to the Texas side. If you remember the vocabulary word filibuster, we were talking back then about people crossing a border to fight in a war. It's kind of the same thing going on here. So, of course, this is going to increase tensions between Mexico and Texas, which, as we remember from the other day, are still at war. Texas says they're independent. Mexico says they are not. Lamar is going to upset New Mexico also because he's going to assume that the land west of Texas, but it's still touching the Rio Grande, belongs to Texas as well. He feels like he's entitled to this land because of the Treaty of Velasco that Santa Anna signed way back in 1836. And this is going to lead to something called the Santa Fe Expedition. In 1841, Lamar is going to ask the Texas Congress for permission to send troops into Mexico. He's going to get up in front of all these people who vote on laws, and he's going to say, hey, we need to send troops into this area of New Mexico. We need to take it over because it's part of Texas. Congress is going to vote, and they give him a resounding no. Because you got to remember, Texas is still in debt. They do not have money to waste on this sort of thing. But Lamar is going to send a general and about 270 men into Santa Fe, New Mexico, modern-day New Mexico, which was controlled by Mexico at the time, part of the country Mexico. So he's going to send these 270 dudes 1,300 miles away, and their whole goal when they get there is they want to talk to people and try to convince them that they live in Texas already. So they're going to show up to New Mexico and they're going to say, hey, we know you guys think that you're in Mexico, but this is actually Texas, and you should be Texans too. How do you think people are going to respond? I mean, imagine if somebody came to your house and said, hey, you live in Louisiana now. It'd be a little confusing. So, of course, the people in New Mexico are just kind of like, no, we are not part of Texas. And they actually end up running out of supplies, the soldiers do, and they can't return home. So when Mexican soldiers show up, they just surrender. These prisoners are going to be marched all the way from Santa Fe, New Mexico, all the way to Mexico City. And they're going to be in prison for about a year there. The Santa Fe expedition cost Texas a lot of money buying all those supplies and all those troops. And Texas already didn't have money, so it was even more broke now. Lives were also unnecessarily lost on this expedition as well. Here's a map that kind of shows the Santa Fe expedition. You see they started out in Austin, that gray line, and they traveled up through the Great Plains of Texas towards Santa Fe, New Mexico, where they get captured and then they get marched. That means that they had to walk all the way to Mexico City. Another thing Lamar didn't like was Houston, Texas being the capital. Lamar wanted a more centrally located capital of Texas. He thought that Houston was a little too close to Mexico. He wanted something farther north, closer to the center of the state, that would be easier to defend and protect. So he chose a location about 100 miles north of San Antonio. He would name this place Austin in honor of Stephen F. Austin. So, education, everybody's favorite subject. Lamar is really best known today for his contributions to public education in Texas. Lamar believed that a strong educational system would make Texas a great nation. The Texas Congress is going to set aside 18,000 acres of land in each county. So they take some land from each county to set up for public schools. Now, they don't build the schools right away, but they set the land aside for the schools and start building them when they can afford them. Because remember, Texas is, in fact, out of money. So that's what gives Lamar his nickname as the father of education in Texas. That nickname in the capital letters there is a really important thing that you will most definitely see on a test in the very near future. So please make sure that father of education in Texas is in your notes. The last thing we're going to talk about with Lamar is financial difficulty. So like we said a few times, Texas is still very broke. The problems get even worse in Lamar's presidency. So he's going to start using a type of bill that's called a redback. It's not a promissory note like the last ones we talked about with Houston. This is actual like Texas currency. And they're called redbacks because they were made using red ink. So like if you look at a dollar now, most of the ink is black or green. These were red. The redbacks are going to go down in value as the financial problems continue to go up. And by the end of Lamar's presidency, Texas is going to be about $7 million in debt. So if you remember, when Sam Houston became the president in the first place, Texas was about $1 million in debt. Now we're $7 million in debt. So over the course of just a few short years between those two presidents, Texas went from broke to like super broke. This is the point where you should be finishing up that first page of notes now. And we're going to be moving on to that second one. So, as you can imagine, Lamar was not a very popular president with a lot of people. Oh, well, before we do that, we do have this to talk about. You don't have to put this land policy part in your notes unless you want to, if you still have room. But during Lamar's presidency, he's going to bring back the impresarial system, and he's going to do that mostly to try to get people into Texas. The Texas population is going to increase from 34,000 when it was first formed to more than 100,000. So he almost triples the population. So Lamar had a lot of problems. Mexico didn't recognize Texas as independent, debt, and Indian raids. So he wanted to reduce the military. He would use promissory notes to cut spending and employ the Texas Rangers to fight against the Indians. And again, this graphic doesn't have to be in your notes anywhere. This is just kind of to help you see how it works. So, economy, land policy, and Indians. For the economy, he's going to issue redbacks. The result of that is that they're pretty much worthless within 3 years just because of how much the debt is going up. For land policy, he's going to pass a law called the Homestead Law, which is going to result in Texans' homes being protected and up to 50 acres from seizure of debt. That means if you lived in Texas and you owed money, they could not come take your land to pay the debt you owe. His action was to declare war on American Indians. The result is that he removed the Cherokee from East Texas, and the Comanche are going to be pushed farther north and west up into the Great Plains region of Texas. But this costs money because he's got to pay for troops, supplies, ammunition. So this is also going to make debt increase. And that's going to bring us back around to Houston's second time in office. So, the Texas Constitution stated that you couldn't be president for 2 consecutive terms, meaning back to back. So Lamar couldn't be president. But Sam Houston could be. Even though Sam Houston was president, he was a president before, so he could be president again. And not everybody agreed with Houston's plan for Texas, because despite how much money Lamar spent and how many problems people had with him, there were some people that thought he was in the right. But Houston gets reelected in 1841. So this is going to put us at the top of that second page of notes. And with Houston back in office, that means it's a return to Houston's policies. So, he's going to reduce government spending, and he's going to want to pull the Texas military out of Mexico. There had been some soldiers that had been fighting back and forth. He wants to bring everybody back to Texas to try to find a way to stop the fighting. However, not all of the military men that were in Mexico at the time are going to obey Houston's orders to leave. Moore was a Navy commander in Mexico. He defied Houston's orders to leave Mexico and went to New Orleans to repair his ships and resupply his crew. Houston declared Moore a pirate and invited other countries to sink his ships. But Moore is eventually going to return back to Texas. This slide does not have to be in your notes unless you have room. While this is going on, Mexican soldiers are actually going to return to Texas. On March 5th, 1842, this will start at that part of your notes right there where you see that March 1842. General Vasquez of the Mexican army and about 700 soldiers are going to take control of San Antonio, and they're going to raise the Mexican flag over San Antonio, declaring it part of Mexico again. But they end up returning to Mexico 2 days later. Mexican troops return once again to Texas, and this time they're going to take hostages. So, September of that same year, September of 1842, the Mexican soldiers are going to invade Texas again. This time with way more soldiers, 1,400, and they're going to capture San Antonio. And they're going to hold it for a little bit longer, and they're going to take 67 Texan hostages with them. After they take these hostages, they're going to start heading south towards the border, the Rio Grande. Houston is going to send a militia of about 300 soldiers to pursue them to try to rescue the hostages. So, Somerville is the name of the general of this militia that is chasing this Mexican army back towards the Rio Grande. The Mexican army outruns them and actually crosses the Rio Grande. Now, before Somerville left to chase them, Houston told him to not cross the Rio Grande. Like, no matter what, don't cross it. Because remember, he's trying to stop these wars from happening. Whenever Somerville tells his men this, they're going to get really upset. They did not want to leave those 67 people to be prisoners in Mexico. They wanted to keep chasing them and try to see if they could save them. Another big problem is you have to remember at this point, South Texas is like a massive desert. Remember we talked about the Coahuiltecan tribe and how they had to wander this desert and they were constantly looking for food. So the soldiers were afraid that they didn't have enough supplies to cross this desert to get back to friendly territory. So they revolt against Somerville, and they elect a new commander, William Fisher, to lead them into Mexico. And on December 23rd, 1842, they're going to cross into Rio Grande. And this is going to start something called the Mier Expedition. Once in Mexico, the Texans still need supplies. So they stop at a small town called Mier, and they try to force these people to give them supplies. While the Texans waited for these people to gather supplies, another piece of the Mexican army, led by Pedro, I'm not even going to try. You can read it, though. And his troops arrived, and they captured him. It was about a 2-day battle. It was pretty fierce. At the end of it, the Texans were pretty badly beaten and wounded, so they surrendered. These men are going to be taken back to Santa Anna, and he's going to order 1 in every 10 prisoners to be put to death. The rest would end up in prison for life. So, they decided they were going to kill 1 in every 10 prisoners. How would they decide who was going to be killed? This is a quote from Thomas Green, who was a member of the expedition. By drawing of black and white beans from a small earthen mug, the white ones signified exemptions and the black ones death. 159 white beans were placed at the bottom of the mug, and 7 black ones were placed on top of them. So, what happened is they got a clay pot, and they put a bunch of beans in it. And if you pulled a black bean out of the pot, then you were one of the people that was going to be shot. If you pulled a white bean, then that meant that you were going to be killed. Or not killed, excuse me. Imprisoned. Black bean meant killed, white bean meant imprisoned. So they line all the Texas soldiers up, the prisoners, and they have each one of them draw a bean. At the end of it, they shoot the ones who drew the black beans by firing squad, and then send the rest to prison. The rest of the Texans would be prisoners basically for the rest of their life. A lot of them would die in the prison or on the way to the prison. Others would be released in 1844. So this is something known as the Black Bean Incident. It is part of the Mier expedition, and it's something that you'll need to know. So please make sure in your notes you have somewhere written Mier expedition and then also Black Bean Incident. So, like we talked about in the last set of notes we took, Houston thinks the best way to solve all of Texas's problems is to be annexed by the United States. Since his first administration, he had urged the U.S. and Texas to make this happen. At the time in the United States, there's a president whose name is John Tyler, and he also thinks that they should annex Texas. But as the president, he doesn't have the power to just do that by himself. So the United States Senate vote on whether or not they want Texas to be a state, and the ballot fails by one vote, which means that Texas does not become a U.S. state. This disappoints a lot of Texans, and this failure will make annexation a key issue in the presidential campaigns to come. Notice that it says campaigns there. In the presidential races in Texas and the presidential races in the United States, this was a big issue that people would talk about and discuss. In 1844, there are two different elections going on. The election in Texas for president, and then the election in the U.S. for president. So in Texas, the Texans are going to elect Anson Jones as president, and Edward Burleson is going to be the vice president. In the United States, there are these different guys all running: Martin Van Buren, Henry Clay, and James K. Polk. You'll learn a lot more about these guys in 8th grade, so I would definitely make sure you jot some of these names down. For sure, you need to write down Polk, because Polk is the one who's actually going to win. And his party, the Democratic Party in the United States, is the one that really wants Texas to be part of the United States. One of the big key issues when it came to Texas being a state is slavery. You have to understand that at this time in American history, slavery is a real issue. You have states that are free states where there are no slaves, and then you have states that are slave states where the entire economy of these states is built on slaves. And so the United States is very cautious to let Texas join, because Texas would become a slave state if it joined the United States. And a lot of people in the United States do not want more slave states. Polk does. So, with him winning the election, annexation is looking pretty good for Texas. On February 26th in 1845, the U.S. Congress is going to approve a joint resolution, which is basically just a formal ruling. It's like they just sit down and agree that this is something that should happen, and they agree that Texas should become the 28th state. On December 29th, 1845, Texas is going to become the 28th state in the United States. That sentence at the bottom there, the December 1845 and the 28th state of the United States, that needs to be in your notes for sure. The date and the number. So we talked back here about Anson Jones being elected as president in Texas. Even though Texas is going to be annexed, he still has some time before that annexation happens that he's in charge of Texas. So these are the issues that he's going to face. Still the problem of debt, still making peace with the natives, and the debate over annexation to the U.S. itself. Okay, we're going to be annexed. How are we going to be annexed? When are we going to be annexed? What kind of money do we need to pay people? Are we going to owe this debt? Are they going to take this debt for us? There were a lot of questions. But here's you kind of a breakdown of the presidents. You have 4 presidents. You've got Burnet, who was the president during the Texas Revolution. He was not elected. He was just kind of chosen to act as president while Texas was fighting a war. When that war is over, Sam Houston is elected president. After Sam Houston, you have Lamar. After Lamar, you have Sam Houston for a second time. And then finally, Anson Jones as the last president. This is the breakdown that's in the bottom of your notes. You don't have to write anything in those boxes. I already put this in there for you. I wanted you to have this slide in your notes because of how well it compares these 3 presidents. You have Houston, who wanted to limit spending, and you had Lamar, who wanted to increase. They all 3 kind of serve financial problems. Houston dealt with that with promissory notes, whereas Lamar used redbacks. Houston was trying to be as peaceful as he could be with Mexico and the Native Americans, whereas Lamar wanted to expand Texas borders and remove all of the natives from Texas. Houston did a lot to reduce the army, eliminate the Texas Navy, and supported annexation, whereas Lamar would increase the size of the military and wanted Texas to remain its own nation. Jones mostly just announced the annexation of Texas. He was a big supporter of annexation, and he was the president of Texas. So that's the end of our notes for today. I hope this went well for you. Like I said, I know that some classes really struggled to get through that last video from the previous day, talking about the first half of the Republic of Texas, those other 2 pages of notes. So if you have any time left in class, please use this time to go back and double check to make sure you have all of that done. I can go through and I can see the responses on these exit tickets and Manifest Destiny assignments, and it doesn't match up with the amount of students that I have from Jones classes. There are a lot of people who do not have this done. I would like to remind you that the Manifest Destiny assignment is for a grade. Okay? Please use full sentences and make sure you turn it in. When you get to the bottom of the Google form, make sure you hit submit. And then when you go back to Classroom, make sure you actually turn it in. Please do the same with the exit ticket as well. Thanks so much, and I hope you guys have a great day.